Noes of 57, Clause 3 will stand part. I will report this bill with amendment presently. Members, we come now to consideration of the Electronic Identity Verification Bill. The question is that Part 1 stand part. This is debate on Clauses 3 to 7. The Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Mr Chairman, we seem to have got to this bill with extraordinary speed this afternoon. I was actually thinking that we might not get to this bill until after the dinner adjournment, but I'm delighted that we have. This is a bill that I was very pleased to have at our Select Committee, the Government Administration Select Committee, and one which, while it didn't provoke a lot of debate and discussion in terms of the number of submissions we had, it was certainly of great interest because it really does, it posed to our committee the tension that people, perhaps not so much of the younger generation, but perhaps people of the age of my colleague Christopher Foy would not be as concerned as perhaps older people of my generation and even older than me. And that is the anxiety that some people feel about the use of their identity, personal identity, in an electronic form, and that really was at the heart of our discussions. And that tension exists because there is that anxiety, but at the same time, the use of electronic procedures for people to access information, to have data or information shared, for people to gain information for themselves, which may be dependent upon them providing their personal identification, has huge advantages. So the balancing trick, if you like, for our committee was to ensure that the anxiety around improper use of people's identity information, identity fraud, as we are very familiar with in this House, possible abuse of people's identification, or by giving their information, by giving their personal information, some other individual being able to access information about them or others by using that could be possible. So this is quite a big deal. It's an important thing. We know, for example, that there are a very large number of scams where people's credit cards are used inappropriately, about 2,000 each day, where there's credit card fraud or identity theft or some spam, some virus that's given that people haven't been asked. We know, Mr Speaker, and of course we've had very recent examples raised in this House of privacy breaches. We've seen a large number in government departments, and actually I think we should consider ourselves fortunate that the committee considered this bill prior to the most recent major breaches of work and income through their kiosk, where just a regular person off the street, more or less, was able to gain access to totally inappropriate information without doing anything illegally. I think that the committee may have had a large number more of submissions had it been considering this legislation at the time that the work and income kiosk fiasco was being undertaken.
6,300 people affected.
My colleague, Dr David Clark from Dunedin North, has just told me there were 6,300 people identified in IRD over the last 12 months. So, Mr Chairman, as I say, the fact that our committee considered this some time ago and it's now just getting to this committee stage, I think is hugely advantageous, because otherwise we may have been considering it in quite a different environment. So the principles that are outlined in Part 1 of this bill were agreed. This had cross-party agreement. They were not difficult issues. So we wanted to make sure that people were only able to... We're not obliged to give out their personal details in order to access information, but we knew that as people became more confident with the system, that it would certainly evolve. We had also the absolute understanding of what information was able to be shared between different agencies, obviously not for a different purpose than the person who gave that authority agreed, and also other matters which people might not have considered, such as the principle of people being able to access their own history. So what has their own history been used for in terms of this electronic identity credential? So, Mr. Chairman, there was no debate or division on the committee at all about the principles which were set up. What we were primarily concerned about was far more Mr. Chairman.
Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The issues that I referred to earlier, that tension that exists between people giving electronically authority to access information or to share information against the advantages that are clearly of most beneficial to government departments and agencies in terms of convenience, in terms of lower transaction costs, but also just in terms of basic efficiency, but actually hugely advantageous to the person themselves. We all know that as things like phone banking have evolved, internet banking have evolved, that no matter how much we said we actually really like the face-to-face exchanges, it is also, while the face-to-face exchanges are really pleasant, it is also very convenient for people to be able to have electronic access to a wide number of services. Mr. Chairman, I omitted earlier in this debate to acknowledge the Minister. So Minister Chris Tremaine is responsible for this legislation, and I just want to put a note of acknowledgement on the record to him for guiding it through to this committee stage, but also to acknowledge that actually the bill was introduced by his predecessor, the Honourable Nathan Guy, and during previous discussions on this bill, both have been very helpful in terms of listening to members who have spoken. And I also want to acknowledge the members of the Government Administration Select Committee. I think over the coming weeks we will look back with a considerable amount of fondness on this legislation, because it only received just a couple of submissions to my recollection. Only 12, was it? 12? I thought it was 9, perhaps 12. Not very many anyway, compared to legislation that's before our committee at the moment, which the Marriage Amendment Bill is likely to exceed 12 submitters, I would imagine, as we hear that bill on that particular legislation. So, Mr. Chairman, I know that we've got later on in this debate, I don't think there's any supplementary order papers which cover any of Part 1. I hope that's not the case, because I'm about to conclude my contribution. I might have to take another call if there is an amendment on Part 1. But just to conclude by saying that Labour is very pleased to support this bill. I think that the way we have dealt with it, and I hope the Minister is able to answer any questions that are posed to her during the committee stages of the bill, but I think the way that we considered it at the committee, we made a large number of amendments which I understand have got the support of the House, should give the rest of the House confidence that the bill can progress without further amendments other than that outlined in SOP 128. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I call Kanwal Singh Bakshi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to congratulate